Good afternoon. My name is Tom Simchak. I'm ESA's Director of Research and Programs. Thank you for attending today's webinar titled Reading into Hawaii's Energy Storage Headlines. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on energystorage.org. Questions can be submitted at any time throughout the webinar via the chat box on your browser. And following the webinar, you'll receive a brief survey regarding today's topic and topics for future webinars. Your feedback will ensure that ESA continues to provide the highest value information to you and your organization. All meetings and teleconferences of the Energy Storage Association are held in accordance with our Antitrust Guidelines. We ask that you abide by these guidelines during today's webinar. The full guidelines are available in the members-only area of the ESA website. If you're not yet an ESA member and would like more information, you can reach out to my colleague, Richie O'Neill. Membership includes free access to webinars like this one, along with numerous other benefits. So please reach out and let us know if we can get you any additional information. Before we begin, I'd like to give you a brief update on upcoming ESA events. Our annual Energy Storage Policy Forum here in DC at the Press Club, that's next week, February 13th. Details and registration via the link on your screen. That can also be found via energystorage.org in our events box on the main page. And in 2 weeks, we'll be hosting the first webinar in our new Energy Storage 101 series, providing introductory overview of energy storage technologies. So you have contacts and colleagues who are looking for a little bit more of a from the basic start about energy storage, how it works and technologies involved, something to point them towards. And likewise, you'll find that on energystorage.org under the events section. So today, we have our speakers, Lorraine Akiba, who is president of LHA Ventures and a former Hawaii Utility Commissioner, and Woody Rubin, president at AES Distributed Energy, along with Rob Cooper, director of business development at AES Distributed Energy. There have been a number of big headlines lately in the trade and business press about Hawaii. Just a few weeks ago, AES inaugurated the largest solar plus storage project in the world on the island of Kauai. They developed that with the Kauai Island Utility Cooperative. And Greentech Media described a recent Hawaiian Electric Company solar plus storage proposals as, quote, jaw-dropping for both their size and low cost per kilowatt hour. But what's driven this aggressive push for storage projects in Hawaii? While there are many unique aspects to energy in Hawaii, not the least of which is the fact that it's quite literally a islanded grid with no connection to mainland U.S. or even between its major islands. The issues that Hawaii has been dealing with regarding very high renewable energy deployment and power sector resilience are highly informative for anyone and perhaps a preview of what's to come elsewhere in the country and the world. So with that, I'll hand it over to Lorraine. A reminder that you have a Q&A box to ask questions, and we'll go to a Q&A after our presenters are done. So handing over to you, Lorraine.
Thank you, Tom. And I'm really pleased to be here today and participating on the panel with both Woody and Rob. Aloha, everyone from Hawaii. The wonder of technology, being able to participate in a webinar virtually. I'm going to be covering today some of the regulatory framework and background for Hawaii's journey in energy storage and the latest buzz, of course, from our state in terms of energy storage systems and solar and storage projects that have come online and are leading the way again for the rest of the country. Next slide, please. As Tom mentioned, I am a former Hawaii Public Utilities Commissioner. My term ended in June 30 of last year, but I was part of the journey, as I said, to get to the current energy storage environment that we find in Hawaii. And really, it is a robust regulatory framework that has been provided for energy storage and grid modernization in Hawaii. And really, this started very early, back in, as far as from the Hawaii PUC back in 2014 when the PUC set forth our policy guidance for usage of distributed energy resources, including energy storage technology. And what was then known in 2014 as a very famous white paper, the Hawaii PUC issued a guidance called the Inclinations on the Future of Hawaii's Electric Utilities in a docket that was addressing the integrated resource plan for the utilities, and with docket 2012-0036. For those of you that are into going back to see some of the documents and some of the filings, you can find it there in the Hawaii PUC's document management system. But basically what the PUC had done at that point in time was to try to encourage the utility to create a more robust and a 21st generation distribution system using distributed energy resources. And in that particular white paper, the PUC encouraged investments in grid flexibility and the growth of utility scale and distributed renewable energy resources, and encouraged and clearly defined energy storage as being part of those distributed energy resources. So it provided, in some sense, regulatory certainty and clarified the role that tools such as energy storage, demand response, and other load management techniques, we put that on an equal basis to traditional generation assets so that the vision of the integrated grid of the future could be achieved. What had preceded this was the Hawaii legislature in 2015 had enacted a law to increase the renewable energy portfolio standard. Well, actually in 2008, those laws had been in place and we already had a robust renewable portfolio standard at 70% by 2050 and also a 30% energy efficiency portfolio standard. So this really preceded the 2014 guidance, but in 2015, after we issued the guidance, the Hawaii legislature increased the renewable energy portfolio standard for electric utilities to 100% by 2045. So increase the percentage and shorten the time, which again created an external driver for energy storage systems and being paired with renewables, because that has been shown now to be a very viable solution. And energy storage, in fact, can help deal with the intermittent energy resource and use that energy resource, whether it's solar or wind, for different times of the day to benefit the customers. Also in 2018, just last year, the legislature passed a bill which became Act 15, requiring 100% carbon reduction in other sectors and Hawaii to be carbon neutral by 2045. So many of these policies were intended to address climate change impacts and mitigation. And solar and storage, as we see from the aftermath and the rebuild of Puerto Rico and Hurricane Maria, are also another strategy. Solar and storage, distributed generation, resilient centers that energy storage is part of, and especially solar and storage, provide additional resilience, provide a different hardening of assets when transmission and distribution lines have been catastrophically damaged. And so it is also part of an adaptation strategy going forward. Next slide, please. These are some of the key Hawaii PUC dockets relevant to usage of energy storage technology for grid services. And you know, I am proud to say that, and I've always said this before, that Hawaii is sending postcards from the future. And many of these dockets really also were trailblazing. As people probably know, Hawaii has the highest penetration of rooftop PV, and for its population size, a very, very high amount of penetration of renewable energy on very small separate island grids. In fact, KIUC, which was mentioned earlier by Tom, and I know that the AES speakers will be speaking to some of their projects there, is already almost at 50% renewable energy on their grid during the day. I mean, it's amazing, and with the additional solar and storage peaker plants are going to excel that benchmark, and then probably will achieve 100% renewable even before the other utility. So, but part of that was really the role of the regulators to set the right tariff to incent not only, you know, utility scale solar and storage projects, but also being able to incent customers, whether that's commercial customers or residential customers, to provide customer grid supply plus storage. So part of the evolution from the traditional net energy metering to a more smart export and customer grid supply took place during the same period of time, 2014, 2015. And finally, I think, towards the end of 2016, the process started to yield specific results, and there was a technical track and a market track where hosting capacity analysis, technology, and technical improvements to the tariffs were discussed with a consensus stakeholder group. I think AES maybe even participated in that. And in February 2018, the PUC approved the Smart Export Tariff and Customer Grid Supply plus Storage Tariff revisions, which set new bill credit fixed rates for smart export and really encouraged customers to use customer grid supply plus storage programs, which would allow HECO in this case to measure and monitor and control customer grid supply systems with storage, and to be able to use that to provide support to the grid. A companion docket that is relevant here, and it's also part of, I think, again, increasing the base for use of energy storage, whether that's utility scale storage or customer-sided storage, was really our demand response tariffs for grid ancillary services. Where again, this was a 2-year process, even 3-year process, where the docket held technical working groups and stakeholders worked with the utilities, with HECO, to identify 4 broad ancillary service tariff categories, where now distributed energy resources, DR, had the potential to meet ancillary services to support the grid. And the 4 broad ancillary service tariff categories were fast frequency response, regulating reserves, replacement reserves, and capacity. And tariffs, I think the docket is still underway to actually monetize those credits and to actually put the specific credit amounts in place. And of course, another key docket was the grid modernization docket, which if people have been following Hawaiian Electric Companies and HECO, we did the Hawaii PUC did approve HECO's grid modernization plan, and they initiated an integrated grid planning system where they again are trying to plan ahead for power supply improvement needs. And now, under our rules, they are actually required to look at non-wires alternatives. So again, where energy storage can perhaps be utilized again as a generation resource to avoid a maybe a substation upgrade or transmission upgrade, which is a lot more costly. That's been integrated into the system planning, both at the transmission and distribution level for Hawaii. And I think that's what has led the way. The regulatory framework has assisted and put down the basic foundation that will allow more solar storage and energy storage, solar and energy storage projects to go forward. Next slide, please. So I'm just wanted to highlight, and I know that the AES representatives will talk more specifically about a lot of the technical requirements of this, but I just wanted to show that, Kauai Island Utility Cooperative really led the way. They were the first utility to actually implement and put into place a fully dispatchable solar and storage peaker plant. And the first was a Tesla Solar City solar and storage PPA, which was executed in September of 2015. That plant is now up and running, and you can see, with 13 megawatt hours of storage, a 20-year term PPA, and a price point about 13.9 cents per kilowatt hour, which at that time was very, very incredibly cheap for Hawaii and very cost effective. I know mainland prices probably, you're thinking of Tucson Electric Power and others, it came in a lot cheaper later on. But for Hawaii, that's an incredibly cost effective price. And you can see from the slide, the next 2 PPAs that, within about, a year and a half, 12, 17 months, the pricing point went down considerably because of the incredible decline in cost of PV, systems, as well as the declining cost of energy storage, whether that was, in the case for Hawaii, it's primarily lithium-ion batteries, but the availability and supply, and because of the demand probably of what was happening in California too with energy storage systems, the price points began to go down. So the AES Maui solar and storage PPA, which was entered into in January 2017, 28 megawatt AC PV system, 100 megawatt hours of storage, 25-year PPA term at 11 cents per kilowatt hour. And then following the AES KAHA solar and storage PPA entered into in December 2017, 14 megawatt AC PV system, 70 megawatt hour storage, and 25-year term at little less than 11 cents, 10.85 cents per kilowatt hour. So the trend showing a continued downward pricing and benefits for customers. And so I think that's a very positive development. Not only are we proving the technology can work, and with the high renewable energy grid, Kauai is really just the only resources they really have are solar and some hydro and biomass. They don't have any wind on Kauai. And while it is a smaller grid, I think it is a good demonstration case for the viability of solar and storage in many other contexts. It doesn't have to be an island grid, obviously, in areas on everywhere else, especially where resilience is a concern, and you need to be able to have continued delivery of energy in areas that may be even rural or geographically isolated. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to end my portion of the talk really with more of observational discussion. Emerging trends and highlights, I guess, is what I've observed regarding energy storage in Hawaii. As I mentioned before, continuing declining prices for PV, and also paired with declining prices for both utility scale and behind-the-meter energy storage systems. I think what's a real game changer here, too, is the fact that customers are incented in Hawaii. So this could be larger customers, whether that's university campuses, hotels, hospitals, retail, the Walmarts, the Amazons of the world. They're being incented to be able to use their own PV and their own storage systems to provide additional resources for utilities to call upon and to support the grid. And particularly with extreme weather, climate change impacts being more of a concern, and after the lessons learned from Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, the increased usage of energy storage for microgrid services. And Hawaii, again, is leading with a number of pilots that are incorporating not only the advanced technology, the artificial intelligence technology aspects of it, but the energy storage paired with solar for microgrids in various key geographical areas in our island. And there's increased reliance on renewable energy, as I said, paired with storage for resilience. And most states, I think, are now requiring utilities to account for non-wires alternatives in modernizing grid infrastructure. I think most of the grid modernization plans that we see going forward in various other jurisdictions or regulators have issued initial orders or have put into place regulations. They're requiring utilities to look at non-wires alternatives instead of the traditional CapEx spend of continuing to expand out transmission lines, continuing to build out more and more substations, continuing to build out traditional peaker plants. Another example of that, I would say, is probably Con Ed, I realize, in the Marcus Garvey microgrid project, which uses a combination of these kinds of resources with storage as well. And I think the key thing, which is really coming somewhat from the grid edge, is the innovation and technology is enabling more energy storage usage. The power control systems that are not only in the solar inverters themselves, but also in the battery. There's power control systems and artificial intelligence technology tools that can immediately allow control and operational flexibility that probably wasn't there 5 years ago, that gives a utility operator a lot more in that toolkit. So I think the future is bright in this area. I do see the trends seem to indicate that. And next slide. And on that note, I'm going to segue over to the AES representative to fill in on some of the specific details, and particularly on the HECO RFP, which just recently got more buzz in terms of 7 solar and storage projects that have been recently penned and are pending approval before the Hawaii PUC. If you have any questions, that's my contact information. I believe Tom will be making the slides that's available.
Yes, we will have thank you very much. We will have a full recording available within the next day or so. So if anyone missed the very start, that will be available. So thank you very much, Lorraine. As a reminder to everyone, you can submit questions in the chat box, and we'll address those in the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Next, we turn to Woody Rubin, President of AES Distributed Energy, and Rob Cooper, Director of Business Development. Woody and Rob, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Lorraine. And good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on what time zone you're in, if anyone else is in Hawaii or California. So just real quick, this first slide here is a little background for those not familiar at a high level with the AES Corporation. AES Distributed Energy, which is the business that Rob and I sit in here, is a wholly owned subsidiary, but the corporation, which is headquartered in Arlington, Virginia, services many businesses around the world and currently in 15 countries. And I think interestingly has been incorporating storage in our own power plants and around the world for over a decade. And we're very happy to be able to leverage all that execution and operational history for storage in our own fleet and for our customers. Let me turn in here in the next slide, which is a little bit more about AES and specifically within distributed energy and AES in Hawaii. The AES Distributed Energy, we are a developer and owner-operator of solar and solar plus storage, so renewable and storage projects across the U.S. And within AES as a corporation, have actually been in Hawaii for 25 plus years. Here on the next slide, you'll see kind of a real current snapshot of our development in Hawaii. I think what's interesting here, if you just kind of look at the megawatt tally and the distribution of projects, very briefly in Barbers Point, we have an operational thermal plant, coal that has been operational for 25 plus years. But if you look at the growth, all the new growth is in renewables, and that has been facilitated in a huge way by the incorporation of storage into those renewable projects to be able to provide, not just energy, but firm capacity that the grid and the grid operators can rely on, as Lorraine made reference to earlier. And so it's really incredible. As I like the analogy of Hawaii as a postcard to the future, because it's just incredible to see the amount of capacity that is now in development that will be and is operational into the grid. And we'll get into some of the specifics of that, but the kind of the conversion here in Hawaii is happening at a pace and at a scale that I do think kind of anticipates what you'll see in the mainland and what you're already seeing. So digging into a few of the kind of specifics, we'll go island by island here. First off, as Lorraine made reference to our Hawaii project, which is a 100 megawatt hour storage facility paired with 28 megawatts DC of solar. This is for those familiar, on the south side of Hawaii, near Poipu, if you've been fortunate to spend time there. Our PPA was signed and submitted in late 2016, early 2017, and the project is now operational, although we're going through the commissioning phase of the project now. It's particularly interesting to see the use cases, which we'll get into here in a minute, for an islanded grid like Kauai. The system is designed as a 5-hour system, which means that we are in a typical day we could be covering a good chunk of morning capacity and evening capacity. But as Lorraine made reference to, Kauai, like many other islands on Hawaii, is in some sense saturated by what we call direct-to-grid solar, whether that's in front of the meter or behind the meter. And so the incremental value of bringing on kind of an additional intermittent resource, particularly solar, on such a saturated grid is next to nothing or impossible. And so you've got this funny situation where as much renewable energy as you can bring on the grid, particularly with solar at solar's current pricing, is accretive from a rate structure and accretive from a cost structure, but you don't have the ability to bring that fuel onto the grid without storage. And so the kind of the incremental value, if you will, that storage unlocks on a grid like Kauai is really incredible. And then the other, I think, other thing I think that's neat about projects like these, both the recent Hawaiian Electric procurement and on Kauai, is that given the amount of behind the meter solar that exists, the folks that have benefited from the cost structure of that are limited to those on site, right? So if you're running your own home, or if you're running a business or even a campus or a brewery with behind the meter solar, that facility is really the only beneficiary from a cost structure. Whereas a project like Lauai, and we'll get into the other future ones, it's providing the cost benefit of solar and then facilitated by the firm capacity that storage brings, but the economic benefit of that is passed on to every recipient of, or every beneficiary and customer on the grid. I'm going to click forward here on the KAHA project. This is a project that we have that's located at the Navy's PMRF facility on the west side of Kauai, so past Waimea for those familiar. We're under site prep right now, and that project we hope to have online by the end of this year. I think the other thing I'd like to highlight on this was part of the same broader procurement with KIUC. It's a slightly smaller system, as you see, at 70 megawatt hours. Because this project is located on the Navy's facility, its day job and its normal operations will be the same as Lauai. We're delivering energy direct into the grid, and it will be functioning as essentially as a renewable peaker for morning, evening capacity, and avoiding for the vast majority of the plant's production delivery of energy direct into the grid during our quote-unquote solar day. However, we have additional capability in the event of a grid outage to switch to an islanding mode, so operating at a lower capacity, but essentially serving for that microgrid functionality as a 24/7 plant. Going on to the operation of storage, I'm going to turn this over to Rob to describe also what our current status with on other islands. But again, just in sum, on many if not all of the Hawaiian Islands, we've reached the point. For anyone who's flown in and out of Oahu or the other islands, you can see all the amount of rooftop solar. So again, we've reached the point of saturation where the incremental benefit is close to zero, if not impossible, if not impossible to unlock for bringing on additional intermittent solar. Storage can allow then for shifting of generation when it's needed, or from when it's not needed. I guess it's better to say during the day, and when other units are operating at mid-load, to providing firm capacity that's very flexible. And I should also say it's instantaneous, so or near to instantaneous. So you're going from a spinning grid to a digital grid in a large portion, and the speed and the flexibility that unlocks is significant. We should also mention that the offset, since you're offsetting capacity from a renewable source here, that does not have emissions or require burning of diesel, for example. So the economic and environmental benefit of that is significant. I think at Lauai alone, we are, I forget the number, Rob, but it's about 4.5 million gallons or so of diesel offset annually, right? So with that, I'm going to turn over to Rob to describe a little bit about Hawaiian Electric.
Sounds good. Hey, everybody, this is Rob Cooper. So as publicly announced, AES was awarded 2 projects under the recent procurement by Hawaiian Electric for new renewable dispatchable generation. As the headline said, they procured 7 projects. We were awarded 2 of them. we wanted to just kind of touch on two of our projects at a high level, which are under development and have PPAs in front of the PUC currently. The first project is shown here with some renderings is our Maui project, which is located in central Maui. It's a 60 megawatt solar PV project with a 60 megawatt 4-hour duration battery energy storage system, so 240 megawatt hours of energy storage combined with the solar. That's located in central Maui, and again, it's in the initial stages of development and with the PPAs under review by the PUC. Our second project is on the Big Island on the northwest corner near Waikoloa. It is half the size, and it is 30 megawatts of solar combined with a 30 megawatt 4-hour duration battery, so 120 megawatt hours of storage capacity. So we're really excited about these two projects, and I think that's kind of all we had to talk about on these. But
yeah, maybe just in sum, first of all, thanks for the invitation to present on this. In terms of the Hawaiian Electric procurement, maybe just as a note, there's a current open docket, so there's been public information made available. We can't speak to, given the PUC review, as Rob made reference to, we can't speak to too much specifics on those. I will just say, though, a couple things to note. I think that's been noted publicly, but first off, the price ranges show as you would expect, a continued decline from what's been contracted in, for example, the KIUC projects. Lorraine made reference to the continued cost declines. I think a really interesting note is the level of scale kind of on not just AES projects, but kind of across the procurement. I think an interesting note that GTM pointed out is that the storage component of this procurement about doubles the size of the U.S. storage market. So it's a really encouraging and significant scale. And then I think the other thing I'd like to point out is just the timeline for the procurement and the regulatory framework that Lorraine made reference to really facilitated a kind of a record-breaking contracting tempo and pace. So you saw just an incredible scale of projects get submitted to the PUC, which are now under review at. But that really would not have been possible without this incredible push from all the Hawaiian Electric teams, and really those are three different islanded companies and teams in Maui Electric. You've got Helco on Big Island, and then Hawaiian Electric on Oahu. But the kind of whole framework to pull that all together and get that many projects submitted to the Hawaii PUC in the timeline that it did really took an incredible kind of push by all parties, and then within the framework and the kind of space that has been facilitated here by the regulation and everything that went into that. So it's something that the entire industry should, and all those who participated, give a big pat on the back. I will conclude there, and I turn it back over to you, Tom.
Great. Thanks so much. It was really great, Woody and Rob. Thanks to Lorraine as well. Reminder, you can submit questions via the chat box. We've got quite a few in here already, so I'm going to kind of combine some similar questions as we go here. So first one I think will be for Woody and Rob. To the extent you guys are able to discuss them, we had some questions on the structure of the PPAs and what kind of debt equity ratio would be representative for those. Anything you're able to say about how those PPAs were set up?
Sure. You're asking about the KIUC PPAs?
I think any of the PPAs involved in the projects you've been discussing. There's a couple of those questions coming in throughout the presentations.
Sure. So I think so first off, we get questions frequently on, well, how do you pay for capacity versus energy in these structures, and I think a frequent question that the industry deals with is, for all the services that storage can provide, ancillary services, capacity. There's all kinds of, as everyone knows, hopefully here on this call, that can get tricky when you deal with kind of multiple revenue streams. I think the benefit of the contracting structure these PPAs in Hawaii for just in general, and a lot of this is public, so folks can log on to the PUC's docket and look at these contracts. But is that they're structured so that you're essentially dealing with one revenue stream, or valuing the capacity and these additional benefits that the system can provide in a very as simple and predictable of a revenue structure as possible. That helps with financing. That helps with reducing transaction costs. And I think I think it's a model that we try to look at for other markets as well. The more that you can kind of simplify that and put all those benefits into kind of one revenue stream, and then figure out appropriate measurements, so to kind of keep both sides honest and make sure that the systems perform as anticipated, and particularly deliver the throughput capacity that the grid will be relying on. That will only help to drive down kind of the ultimate LCOE and the ultimate cost that these projects contract at. So hopefully that's responsive to the general question.
Hey Tom, can I just respond to that from more of a regulatory perspective? I think that historically commissions and commissioners they're open to power purchase agreements, and especially in jurisdictions like ours where you have smaller utilities. The risk is not on the utility or on the customers, in terms of bearing the ultimate burden of that risk. When you have a PPA that's well structured, as what he just pointed out, that's already been negotiated. The risk of continuing good operation of that facility rests on the developer and operator of the facility, and therefore it's a win-win in a sense. But I think also what is important from a regulatory perspective, is which we took care of here in Hawaii, is there is statutory provisions and rules that people always raise the imputed debt issues for utilities, and why PPAs sometimes have a downside as well. But we took care of that. That's why putting everything in upfront and negotiating a good PPA upfront is transparent, but the costs are certain. And so because those are pass-through costs, the utility doesn't suffer from it, but then the risk also is on the developer for some of the other things that if the utility just own that asset. So there's benefits to that, and I think regulators look at that, especially when they're looking at the impact on customers in a smaller grid or a smaller utility customer-based situation.
Great, thanks so much. To kind of pick up the theme a little bit there, we have a question from Ed Bullinger. For the amount of storage, is that determined by the off-taker, or is AES, or some other developer perhaps, curve fitting in a long-term forecast for the location to determine what is the optimal fit on cost versus energy when proposed?
Yeah, hey, this is Rob. I'll take this one. So for the KUC example, we worked during the initial phase of the project and during the kind of the contracting portion. We worked with KUC on different duration lengths, 4 or 5 hours, et cetera, and they ultimately chose a 5-hour duration battery for our 2 projects on Kauai based on their island needs. So as has been mentioned, they have a lot of daytime solar, so they were really looking for this to just shift as much energy as possible. So the longer duration energy storage was most beneficial for them in both of the Kauai instances. And then for the Hawaiian Electric procurement, it was, again, the utility's decision on what duration of storage they wanted best for their grid, and those ended up being 4 hours.
Great, thanks. From Kevin Johnson, can you expand on the microgrid switching capability with PMRF? Does the Navy procure for this separately? If so, under what type of procurement mechanism?
So, yeah, sure. No, not procured separately. We have just one contract with the utility, but given the location and given the islanding capability built in as a result of that, which this gets into kind of specifics on substation location and the Navy's own grid, that you've got islanding capability kind of built in, which is controlled by KUC and procured and all run through KIUC.
Great, thanks. Had a question from Mahdi Mataleb. With aggregated demand response and small storage systems, will that work with the current Hawaii communication infrastructure? I guess is the current telecommunications infrastructure adequate? I think maybe one for Lorraine to start with.
Yeah, that's all part of the grid modernization in Hawaii. The telecom aspect and the integrated energy network of the future requires that aspect to be robust. But that is being addressed in the grid modernization implementation plans for Hawaiian Electric, at least, and working with whether it's the telco companies and in terms of what kind of communication capability. But Hawaii does lead as well in some fiber optic and broadband capabilities from that side, and we do regulate, one of the major telecom companies, which is different from some other places. We don't regulate cable, and we don't regulate the other, wireless communication companies. But I think that's a good point. I think that's why technical working groups, and that is a real key part of why Hawaii's implementation is different. And the Commission has encouraged this in various dockets. When these kinds of rules and requirements in terms of actual implementation of demand response, demand-side management control systems, and Hawaiian Electric has chosen to go the route of DERMS and using third-party aggregators in some ways, and customer-sided, commercial-sided, utility-scale solar, larger, not utility-scale, but larger solar systems paired with storage for some of the larger customers as well. So it's not just the PPAs and utility-scale solar and storage projects that we're discussing on this particular webinar. So it's a diverse portfolio, but part of that really is getting the right stakeholders in the room when you're putting together requirements. Of course, we don't necessarily micromanage that, but the results of that process are reflected obviously in the tariffs that get presented to the Commission for approval. And that is one thing that has to be kept in mind, as well as cybersecurity concerns. So, as we get more technology-driven, more of the data analytics, the power control systems, we also have to be concerned about, the cybersecurity issues of having all this be remotely controlled and beneficial to the operator of the grid, but then also minimize risk of those assets being compromised.
Thanks so much. Ken Brown has a question. I can see that solar plus storage can get us to 50 or even 80% renewables. How does solar plus storage get us to 100% renewables without greatly increasing costs? And to build off that, how do you guys, kind of looking way down the road, see how deployments might change or adapt as renewables penetration gets very high, kind of looking in your crystal balls?
Obviously, as developers of solar plus storage, we understand our main fuel source is the sun. So it's inherently going to, there are going to be cloudy days, et cetera. So, but one cool thing, given the efficiencies of, increased efficiencies, lower costs is, for example, the Y project that we keep talking about is 20 megawatts, 5 hours, but, it can also be run in different scenarios for, say, 4 hours, 24 hours, or 4 megawatts for 24 hours. So you can kind of run these systems. They don't need to be run at full capacity until the batteries are depleted. They can be run at lower capacity for much longer durations. So on our side, we think that's kind of like a cool cutting edge way to utilize these in more of a base load scenario than just a peak offset for as long of duration as you can do the max capacity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
Yeah, Tom, can I just weigh in there too? I think, what you have to remember about Hawaii too is, and that goes back to the inclinations and what was said as regulatory guidance. While we do have, robust renewable portfolio, and that will continue as fossil plants are retired and decommissioned because of the renewable portfolio standard requirements to get to 100% by 2045. There are other resources in that generation toolkit, which we said energy efficiency, demand response, and energy storage are to be treated as generation resources. So instead of building a new plant or they could substitute as base load plants. I mean, the framework is there. So we can't forget that energy efficiency and demand response, or load control, as well as just reduction of certain usages, will help to make for a portfolio of being able to manage the grid. And another factor that's coming into play is as transportation is electrified, and there is a high penetration of EVs in Hawaii. Makes sense, no range anxiety. I think we're like the top 4 if you just look at the numbers of EV adoption amongst the states, but we're like up there again per capita because we have a smaller population. We actually exceed California in terms of per capita on an island of people that are using EVs, and that makes sense because of the oil and gas prices. I mean, the same effect of that commodity on the utility sector affects consumer consumption of gasoline. So, there's all these factors, again, going towards there'll be increased load probably from EVs in the future, especially we have the 100% decarbonization statute driving the decarbonization in other sectors, and that's why I put that up there on my first slide, that there is going to be an increased move to decarbonize other sectors, and that would be the other sectors that aren't part of this conversation, but transportation, et cetera, water, other parts of telecom. So, as I said, all of this has to be looked at as an energy ecosystem and a portfolio approach.
Great, thanks. That kind of leads on nicely to a question we have from Peter Wittenberg. Does each utility off-taker have the ability to control the batteries however and whenever they want? Or do the PPAs have restrictions on either charging or discharging, such as time of day? He says this might be particularly relevant for DC-coupled systems. And we also had another question asking whether these solar plus storage projects are DC or AC coupled.
Great. Take the last one first, DC coupled.
Yep.
And then in terms of the restrictions, I think that does get project specific. I'd say, in general though, as I mentioned before, where you've got the main benefit, right, of adding storage to solar particularly in these long duration applications like Hawaii, where we're providing capacity. The capacity needs to be provided, right? As Rob said, there's various ways of kind of weather adjusting that for the fuel, right? Depending on the input from the solar system, but as long as the dispatch is happening, kind of consistent within the operating parameters that get negotiated specifically within the contract, and as long as the system output, particularly in a DC-coupled system, as long as the system output can meet the capacity requirements, and that the throughput, that's the volumetric, throughput that's being negotiated is met, then yes, that's high level. That control and benefit is turned over to the utility to maximize, right? And that's again kind of goes to the ultimate benefit of these systems to truly maximize the benefit for all customers on the grid. You really do need the utility, right? The utility absolutely has to have that control, particularly when you're kind of offsetting a diesel fueled or a traditional thermal generation that's operating 24/7 or for peak capacity, whatever that offset is.
Great, thanks. Now we had a couple of sort of stats questions from Woo Kyu Che on sort of the electricity system in Kauai, asking load of Kauai, so what the peak load is and what is provided by diesel and what's provided by renewables. I think toss out some numbers here, and Woody and Rob, if these sound off, tell me. I think Kauai is seeing more than 90% daytime renewable energy, which is mostly solar, but also some biomass and hydro on a 75 megawatt system peak. And the renewables were about 27% of 2017 annual contribution, but of course that's 2017, and a lot has happened since then. Woody and Rob, does that sound ballpark, or do you have to hand any other of the Kauai stats?
No, I think we agree with those statistics.
Yeah, I think.
Hey, Tom.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Rob.
Oh, no, go ahead, Lorraine. Thanks.
Go ahead. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I usually put up a slide in the slide set that shows, and I think people have seen my slide sets before. I put up a Hawaii electric system size, which shows 4 electric utilities, 6 separate grids, and percentage renewable. And again, although the slide hasn't been updated for 2018, for Kauai, the last count was system peak was 75 megawatts. And then of that, and this is based on some 2017, some 2018, installed PV is like 103% of system peak. So, you've got 77 megawatt hours PV, 7 megawatts biomass, and 9 megawatts of hydro. And then and there was at the time, I put this slide, it was 170 megawatt hours of storage under construction. That was a 2017 figure. So that's probably come online. So you can just get a sense of it for rural Kauai. But I'd be happy to provide this slide, post webinar, so that you can you can add it to the slide deck.
Okay, sure, yeah.
And I would direct probably that questioner to the Hawaii State Energy Office. There's they haven't released their updated one yet, but there is one that comes out every June, Hawaii Energy Facts and Figures, which might also provide some of that on the Hawaii State Energy Office website, energy.hawaii.gov. They haven't issued the one for 2019 yet, so which would contain updated info from 2018. That usually comes out in June of the calendar year.
Great, thanks so much. I was wondering how much resilience is factored into the planning for these sorts of projects. I know Hawaii has had a couple of recent close calls on hurricanes, and also has volcanoes to contend with on the Big Island. In looking at solar plus storage projects, are folks designing for things like black start or like islanding within an island grid? Or to what extent has resilience been factored into planning and programs?
You want me to take that one, Tom?
Sure.
Or Woody, Rob? Okay. Yeah, I would say that, again, after looking at the trends across the country, we just saw it with the polar vortex, right? But we've seen it in California: drought, wildfires, mudslides, Hurricane Maria, and other hurricanes that hit both the Gulf Coast, the Caribbean, up the eastern seaboard. I mean, extreme weather is the new normal. So resiliency is very much part of planning now, and looking at power supply planning, resource planning, integrated grid planning. I think those, what you just mentioned, are in fact factors that the utilities are looking at, and reliability, obviously, and resilience are part of the metrics now for utilities to take a look at this. And I think this is being addressed in a companion docket, the performance-based regulation docket that's also pending as we speak. But it is really important. And in some of the counties, which for Oahu, where Hawaiian Electric is located, there is an actual Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. I sit on the advisory committee or steering committee for that office, and in fact, Hawaiian Electric has been an active partner in some of the working groups to help with actions, both mitigation and adaptation actions, to establish community resilience centers and community resilience hubs around critical infrastructure. And part of that includes renewables and storage, microgrids, the things that we're talking about, both at the utility scale. So there are some facilities on Oahu. I think there's a Schofield generating station project that is a block start capable project. It's actually fully implemented, the facility is open and running. And it can, in the future, as we migrate more, when biofuels become more affordable, it also will be able to be backed up with some biofuel capability. So that's already underway in terms of the resource planning and integrated grid planning, implementation actions that the utilities are looking at. And I know on Kauai, they've been hit directly with Hurricane Iniki, several years ago. They are well aware of the need, and it was devastating. And so I know that KIUC also plans with resiliency in mind for their resources on the grid.
Great, thanks so much. A question from Greg Starheim. How will economics change with ramp down of the ITC relative to future cost reductions? Perhaps for Woody and Rob?
Sure. Well, that is kind of the $10 million question. And I think, there are, other than just ITC versus, system cost, unfortunately, here in the U.S., we also deal with the complexity of tariffs. And in, the current global supply chain, it's not just kind of, solar modules. It could potentially, we're talking about battery cells and steel and inverters and everything. So there's a lot that go into that. But, I will say that I think a good view that we like to take with an AES is compared to international markets where you don't necessarily have something like the investment tax credit, and we're seeing solar plus storage or storage standalone. You're seeing in kind of low renewable penetration markets an incredible fast solar curve. So I think even just kind of correlating to those and looking just straight at LCOEs when you look at international markets, I think that's a good proxy to show that we still have a very, very healthy cost curve ahead of us. And when you kind of normalize for stuff that we can't solve for, we see continued declines, and we can see a lot of additional added value for solar plus storage and storage generally in these markets as we get fast forward.
Great, thanks so much. We're drawing to the top of the hour, so very sorry to those who submitted questions that we weren't able to get to. Obviously, a lot of interest in this topic. We will be circulating a link to recording of the presentation along with the slides. So look for that in your inbox coming up. Also like to highlight our upcoming Energy Storage Policy Forum next week, perhaps mostly for those in the DC area, unless you're keen to make some quick travel. But we'd love to have you at that event talking about a lot of the exciting dynamic policy issues in the energy storage arena. If you have any questions, please reach out to us, education@energystorage.org. Like to extend one last big thank you to Lorraine, Woody, and Rob. Thanks to all of those of you who've joined us, all of those of you who submitted questions. Sorry we couldn't get to them all, and look forward to you joining us on a future ESA webinar. And with that, have a great rest of your Wednesday. Goodbye.